January 2026, the Middle East. If you look at the surface, you see the usual chess pieces. You see the headlines, you see the carrier USS Abraham Lincoln cutting through the water 100,000 tons of steel and nuclear ambition. We've talked about the physics of that ship before, the raw, brutal mathematics of moving a floating fortress across the Pacific in an emergency sprint. But while the cameras are focused on the carrier's flight deck, a silent shift has occurred in the electromagnetic spectrum. The Pentagon has just moved a piece that doesn't fit the modern narrative. They call it Operation Agile Spartan 26.1. The official press releases are masterpieces of diplomatic anesthesia. They call it a routine joint exercise. They speak of interoperability and regional stability. Do not believe the handshake. In the cold logic of the theater, you do not mobilize a strategic fighter squadron, tank them across 7,000 miles of open ocean, and drop them into the world's most dangerous choke point just to practice formations. This is not a drill. This is a rehearsal for the end of a regime. But look at the manifest. Look at who the Air Force invited to this particular party. They didn't send the F-22 Raptor, the undisputed king of the high ground. They didn't send the B-21 Raider, the nuclear ghost that haunts the dreams of air defense commanders. Instead, they reached back into the Cold War. They sent the 494th Fighter Squadron, the Panthers, and they are flying the F-15E Strike Eagle. This is the anomaly. In an age of stealth, in an age of radar-absorbent materials and jagged invisible edges, the F-15E is a dinosaur. It has the radar cross-section of a barn door. It is loud, it is dirty, it screams its position to every radar operator from Tehran to Damascus the moment it leaves the tarmac. It is by all modern standards technically obsolete. So here is the question that should be keeping analysts awake. Why does the United States Navy, the force that commands the USS Abraham Lincoln, arguably the most powerful mobile air base in human history, need help from a 50-year-old Air Force jet, is the king of the sea, unable to protect its own interests? The answer is yes, but the reason is not a failure of courage, it is a failure of geometry. To understand the F-15E's presence, you have to look at the map not as a traveler, but as a killer. The Persian Gulf is not an ocean. To a naval strategist, it is a bathtub. It is a geographic trap. The Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest point is only 21 miles wide. For a Nimitz-class carrier, entering those waters in a high-tension environment is a tactical nightmare. A carrier's greatest defense is its ability to disappear into the vast blue of the open sea. But inside the Gulf, the Lincoln becomes a fixed target in a very small cage. In 2026, the Lincoln isn't in the Gulf. It can't be. It is forced to hold station in the north, Arabian Sea, staying outside the range of the coastal batteries. But safety has a cost, and that cost is distance. This brings us to the first variable in the equation of destruction space saturation. When you look at the Iranian coast today, you aren't just looking at sand and rock, you are looking at a landscape saturated with thousands of short-range ballistic missiles, SRBMs. You are looking at anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in reinforced tunnels. You are looking at hundreds of fast attack craft, swarms of suicide boats designed to overwhelm a ship's defenses through sheer numbers. The threat density is absolute, the reaction time is zero. Now look at the flight deck of the Lincoln, look at the FA-18 Super Hornets, zoom in on their pylons. You won't see 2,000-pound bunker busters. You will see air-to-air missiles. You will see AAM-9X Sidewinders and AAM-120 AMRAAMs. This is the overloaded shield paradox. Because the carrier has to stay so far away to survive, the entire Super Hornet fleet is forced to play defense. They are the immune system of the strike group. They are flying combat air patrols 24/7, their only job being to swat down drones and sink the swarms before they reach the hull. Every F-18 dedicated to saving the ship is an F-18 that cannot be used to strike the enemy. The sword is sheathed because the shield is too heavy. So you ask about the F-35C. The Lincoln carries the Black Knights of VMFA-314. This is the most advanced stealth fighter ever built. It is the solution right wrong. The F-35C is a victim of the very physics that make it invisible. To remain a ghost on radar, the F-35 must carry its weapons internally. Look at the schematic. The weapon bays are cramped. They are designed for precision, not mass. They can carry a GBU-31 JDAM, a formidable weapon, certainly. It can take out a bridge or a command post. But the enemy has had 20 years to prepare for this. They haven't been sitting on the surface, they've been digging. The nuclear facilities, the high-level command centers, the heart of the enemy's power. It's all buried. It's encased under 30 feet of high-density reinforced concrete and layers of earth. To kill these targets, you don't need a scalpel, you need a sledgehammer. And here is the friction point: the weapons required to crack those bunkers physically do not fit inside the F-35. If you hang them on the wings, the stealth disappears. If the stealth disappears, the S-300 missile systems wake up and the Ghost becomes a target. We are standing in front of a 10-meter wall of concrete holding a pocket knife. This is where the nostalgia ends and the kinetic reality begins. Enter the 494th. The Strike Eagle is not a fighter in the way we think of them today. It is a platform engineered for kinetic saturation. It is 40 tons of aluminum and titanium designed to hold 23,000 pounds of ordnance into the sky. Do the math. One F-15E can carry the explosive payload of 3 F-35s combined. But we didn't bring them here for standard bombs. We brought them for a specific piece of engineering that solves the geometry of the bunker, the GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator. Forget the old stories of the Gulf War, where we made bombs out of surplus howitzer barrels. The GBU-72 is a 5,000-pound needle of specialized steel. To understand this weapon, you have to understand the physics of the nail. If you hit a piece of concrete with a hammer, you might chip it. But if you put all that force behind a hardened nail, you pierce it. Most gravity bombs have thin steel skin. When they hit a hardened target at Mach 0.8, they fail structurally. They pancake. The energy of the impact dissipates sideways. The GBU-72 doesn't crumple. Its casing is a high-performance alloy forged to survive the unthinkable. It transfers 100% of its kinetic energy into a single concentrated point. Inside that steel skin sits a smart fuse. This isn't a simple timer. It is an industrial sensor designed to survive a shock of 10,000 Gs. It doesn't explode on contact, it feels the deceleration as it burrows through the earth. It counts the layers of concrete. It waits until it detects the void, the empty air of the room where the generals are hiding. Only then does it trigger. But to make that math work, you need terminal velocity. You need to drop it from the stratosphere. And that requires a launch platform with a frame strong enough to carry 2.5 tons on its center line without snapping the titanium spar. You need engines powerful enough to drag that weight to 30,000 feet, giving the bomb the potential energy it needs to reach penetration speed. The F-35 can't do it. The Bay is too small. The F-18 can't do it. It lacks the raw thrust to weight ratio to hold that load deep into enemy territory and get back alive. Only the Strike Eagle has the brute mechanical capacity to be the executioner. It is the only truck in the inventory capable of delivering the sledgehammer to the front door, but a truck is easy to see, and in a modern war, if you can be seen, you can be killed. The Strike Eagle should be a sitting duck. It isn't, because in 2026 we don't fight with planes, we fight with a nervous system. The F-15E is the muscle, but the muscle is currently waiting in the shadows, waiting for the brain to tell it where to strike. The transition from a brute force machine to a surgical strike begins in silence. To understand how a relic survives in a sky filled with Russian-made S-300 and S-400 radar pulses, you have to stop thinking about the F-15E as a solo actor. In the 2026 battle space, the Strike Eagle is just the heavy hand at the end of a very long, very invisible arm. The cycle of destruction begins with the F-35C launched from the Lincoln. It pushes deep into the red zone, but it doesn't hunt like a traditional fighter. It flies with its radar silent. It is a ghost sniffing the air for electronic signatures. Using its electro-optical targeting system, EOTS, it finds the target not by looking for the bunker itself, but by finding the ventilation shafts, the security perimeters and the telltale heat signatures of buried generators. But the F-35 doesn't pull the trigger. It simply sends a burst of encrypted data. That data is picked up by the enabler, the EA-18G Growler. This is the most critical aircraft in the sky that no one ever talks about. The Growler doesn't carry bombs, it carries energy. It activates its jamming pods, flooding the enemy's radar frequencies with high-power electronic noise. On the enemy screens, the world disappears into a wall of static. The Growler carves a temporary invisible tunnel through the air. Defense network, a corridor of electronic darkness. And through that tunnel, the executioner arrives. The F-15E Strike Eagle dives into the gap. The pilot isn't scanning the ground. The F-35 has already fed the coordinates into the bomb's guidance system. The pilot isn't dodging missiles. The Growler has already blinded the shooters. The Strike Eagle is there for one reason, to provide the physics. it releases the GBU-72. 5,000 pounds of hardened steel falls away. The Pratt and Whitney engines scream as the pilot banks away, but the physics equation is already written. The bomb hits the desert floor at Mach 0.9. It doesn't explode. It burrows. It shatters layers of reinforced concrete like they were made of glass, descending into the dark before the smart fuse finally decides it's time to end the conversation. This is the kill chain. The F-35 is the eye. The Growler is the nervous system. The F-15E is the muscle. If you remove any one of them, the system fails. But when they are fused, you have a weapon that can reach through the most advanced air defenses on Earth and crush the heart of a command structure. However, the air is only half the battle. To truly understand why Agile Spartan is a nightmare for the enemy, you have to look at the ground. For 20 years, the US Air Force operated out of super bases. Places like Al Udeid in Qatar, they were cities. They had Starbucks, swimming pools and massive permanent runways. But in 2026, those palaces are death traps. Every Iranian ballistic missile has those coordinates burned into its memory. In the first 10 minutes of a real conflict, those runways would become a landscape of craters. An F-15 on a broken runway is just a very expensive piece of scrap metal. The Pentagon knows this. That's why they've abandoned the palace for the strategy of the nomad. They call it ACE Agile Combat Employment. It starts with dispersion. The 494th Squadron doesn't park its jets in a neat photogenic row anymore. That is a target-rich environment. Instead they fracture. They split the Wolfpack into small mobile cells. They deploy to austere airfields, places that don't appear on civilian maps. Strips of asphalt in the middle of nowhere, with no permanent buildings and no fixed defenses. By scattering the force, you break the enemy's math. Instead of aiming at one massive target, the enemy has to hunt for a dozen moving variables. You dilute their firepower, you force them to waste their most expensive missiles chasing ghosts in the desert. But scattering your jets creates a logistics nightmare. How do you maintain a high-tech fighter squadron when your parts and fuel are spread across 1,000 miles of sand? You strip away the bureaucracy and initiate the hot pit. Watch the process. An F-15E slams onto a remote runway after a strike mission. It taxis to the end of the strip, but the pilot doesn't shut down. The canopy stays locked. The engines stay running, screaming at idle burning fuel just to stay alive. A C-130 transport plane is already there waiting. Ground crews wearing respirators in the swirling dust drag heavy fuel hoses across the tarmac. They pump JP-8 fuel into the jet while the exhaust is still hot enough to melt skin. Ordnance crews heave fresh bombs onto the pylons. 20 minutes, that is the standard. The hose disconnects. The C-130 ramps up. The F-15 throttles to full afterburner and disappears back into the heat haze. There is no debrief. There is no coffee break. On the ground, an aircraft is a target. In the air, it is a predator. By mastering the hot pit, the Air Force turns a handful of scattered jets into a force with the relentless tempo of a carrier deck. They keep the noise level at maximum. They keep the pressure constant. The enemy looks at their radar and sees nothing. They look at their satellite imagery and see empty runways. And yet every hour a 5,000-pound hammer falls from the sky and erases another piece of their infrastructure. This brings us to the final realization of Agile Spartan. To the casual observer, the flight line looks like a chaotic museum exhibit, a strange marriage of the past and the future. You see the F-35C, a sleek fifth-generation Ghost, flying wingman to the F-15E, a loud-scarred veteran of the Cold War. But if you look through the lens of pure military logic, you realize you aren't looking at two different planes. You are looking at a single integrated organism. This is the ultimate expression of American military philosophy in 2026. The Pentagon stopped searching for the Wunderwaffe, the single wonder weapon that wins the war by itself. That is a fantasy for amateurs. Instead, they built a system of systems. They took the shield, the F-18, the eye, the F-35, and the hammer, the F-15E, and they fused them together with a data link that moves at the speed of light. What you are witnessing is the alchemy of modern violence. The military took a 50-year-old airframe, gave it the godlike vision of a digital ghost, and backed it with the nuclear endurance of an aircraft carrier strike group. They turned an obsolete truck into the deadliest sniper rifle on the planet. Agile Spartan proves that in the next great conflict we don't necessarily need to build a new plane to win. We just need to understand the geometry of destruction. We don't rely on luck or the spirit of the pilot. We rely on the fact that our old iron can talk to our new silicon. We don't fight fair, we fight with math, we fight with logistics, and we fight with an overwhelming industrial capacity to deliver mass at a distance. The next time you see that dirty, loud F-15E roaring off a sun-baked runway in some unnamed corner of the desert, don't you dare call it a relic. Call it the kinetic sovereign. In a world of ghosts and shadows, sometimes you still need a hammer to break the world. The Strike Eagle isn't here to join the future. It's here to ensure the future belongs to those who can still deliver 10 tons of consequences to the enemy's front door. If you want to understand how the military machine actually works, driven by data physics and hard engineering, then you are in the right place. We don't do hype, we calculate victory. Type logistics in the comments if you understand that while amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk supply chains. Hit that subscribe button. This is Navy Decoded.